Thank you. The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 15657 in the name of Elena Whittam on report of alcohol use disorder in the justice system. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Elena Whittam to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and may I thank colleagues from across the Chamber for supporting my motion, enabling me to bring to the Parliament's attention the recent report published by Scottish Health Action on Alcohol Problems entitled Alcohol in Justice, Possession on People with an Alcohol Use Disorder in the Justice System, and may I also welcome representatives from SHAP to the Chamber today. The play on words within the title of this critical report is in itself a lightning rod that we should all be coalescing around. Alcohol is a recurrent feature within our justice system. The link between alcohol and crime is well understood, and this in turn highlights the injustice that is faced by many when alcohol use disorder impacts on the individual, the family and their community. Inequality is at the heart of this issue, and the human cost is staggering. But it goes wider than this, Deputy Presiding Officer. It impacts on all public services, and the cost to the public purse is considerable. Repeated interaction with the criminal justice system, driven by and exacerbated by alcohol use, creates impacts that ripple right through every area of life. Repeated contact with police and courts, and repeat periods of incarceration, repeat homelessness, social work interventions, loss of employment or employment opportunities, poor health resulting in increased need for NHS interventions, including costly unscheduled care. I believe the case for change set out in the report is clear. The number of people with alcohol use disorders is disproportionately high within our Scottish justice system compared to the population at large. And although we are working hard on it, we still have the highest imprisonment rate within Western Europe. We know 63% of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder, with 31% of those individuals possibly alcohol dependent. And the risk of death from alcohol causes is also 3 times higher in men and a staggering 9 times higher for women who have been in prison than it is for the rest of the general population. If we consider adverse childhood experiences and trauma, 25% of people in Scottish prisons are care experienced, 47% have experienced physical abuse in childhood, and around a third lived with someone who was a problematic drinker during childhood. Again, inequality and disadvantage is pervasive in the justice system, and I saw this over and over and over again when I worked in frontline homelessness services. If we think in resourcing terms, the overall estimate for the yearly cost of alcohol-specific and alcohol-related offences on public services is between £462.5 million and £991.7 million, with a midpoint of £721.1 million. And it is therefore important to note also that these figures have not been re-estimated since 2007 and 8, and I think the true figure is likely to be much, much higher. Deputy Presiding Officer, the SHAP report calls for a system that truly integrates health and justice, a system that provides treatment options and community disposals instead of incarceration where appropriate, that offers support at every stage of an individual's journey, from arrest to sentencing and beyond. This isn't just a humane approach, it's an effective one. We know that addressing the root cause of problematic alcohol use through targeted interventions can reduce offending and lead to better outcomes for both individuals and society as a whole. But the reality is that the 2019 Scottish Prisoner Survey showed that only 22% of participants reported that they had the chance to receive treatment for an alcohol use disorder during their sentence. The survey also revealed that 40% of prisoners involved reported being drunk at the time of their offence, and nearly 1/5 of prisoners who took part in the survey were worried about alcohol would be a problem when they got out. But encouragingly, 41% of participants said that if they were offered the help for their alcohol use disorder, both inside and outside of prison, that they would take it. The key recommendations from SHAP outlined in the report are that at each stage of a person's interaction with the justice system, alcohol issues are recognised and properly assessed and acted upon, with key agencies having accountability. Accountability is key. In police custody centres, there should be a standard in place for the identification and treatment of people with an alcohol use disorder for both police and NHS staff. This would include referral to healthcare or addiction services and appropriate tools being used for alcohol use screening and appropriate actions taken, including alcohol brief interventions or arrest referral for alcohol treatment and support. For alcohol brief interventions in justice settings, delivery sits around 29% in prison and 3% in police custody. This urgently needs to rise. Those identified as needing support should be flagged so that their support needs are known throughout their journey in the criminal justice system. This should also help to support the Procurator Fiscal if fulsome information is on the Standard Prosecution Report when looking at suitability for diversion from prosecution. We know that referrals to drug and alcohol specialist treatment in Scottish prisons has fallen in recent years, and I know that work is underway by Public Health Scotland to understand why this is a part of wider work as well that's on reduction to alcohol services in general overall. The Scottish Government is also currently working on a national service specification for alcohol and drugs, and this represents an ideal opportunity to publish a clear specification for justice settings, as well as developing standards for alcohol treatment and support at each stage of the justice system, which will help embed treatment and recovery communities right across the justice sector. Recent broader approaches to justice, like the Public Health Scotland Health and Justice Strategy and the Bail and Release Act, demonstrate a will to change. But the separations of power and the independence of decision-making between the organisations and bodies involved in the justice system can pose a challenge for overall coordination of care and support. We need enforceable standards with clear lines of accountability so that these recommendations are actually implemented and people do not continue to fall through the cracks. Planning for release should happen when someone arrives in custody, so we can ensure that they have been linked in with recovery services and support, housing and welfare provision well up front of release. We should also seek to maximise the role of recovery communities and AA, which can help people to work through these issues. Where attendees have consistent access to meetings, reports suggest reduced cravings, stronger coping strategies and improved engagement with other rehabilitative programmes. Participants who continue AA after release credit it with helping them secure employment, rebuild family relationships and remain sober in the community. The same can be said when people are proactively linked into recovery communities back home. Presiding Officer, when I was a Minister, I was privileged to visit the Glasgow Drug and Alcohol Courts and watch them in action, and I was mightily impressed by the problem-solving attitudes of those sheriffs and their shared desire to drive systems change. I also spoke to other sheriffs right across Scotland who shared the problem-solving ethos, the desire to understand what drives offending and what interventions, what diversions and community justice disposals could deliver better outcomes. This attitude must become the default if we want to sever the link between alcohol and crime. Deputy Presiding Officer, this is not soft justice. This is smart justice. And I look forward to hearing from colleagues across the Chamber today and from the Cabinet Secretary herself, who I know is as passionate about this issue as I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Whittam. I now call Rona Mackay to be followed by Emma Roddick. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to speak in this important debate, and I thank my colleague Elena Whittam for bringing it to the Chamber. I congratulate Elena's long-standing commitment to tackling the problem of alcohol and drug abuse and thank her for her customary, informative and inspirational opening speech. Alcohol abuse and addiction is a significant and pressing issue within the justice system in Scotland. Indeed, it's disproportionately high. Almost two-thirds, 63% of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder, with almost half of those possibly dependent on alcohol. And risk of death from alcohol causes is 3 times higher in men and 9 times higher for women who've been in prison than for the general population, as Elena Whittam articulated. Presiding Officer, all deaths due to alcohol are a tragedy, but as convener of the cross-party group on women, families and justice, that statistic really concerns me. It's estimated that as many as 90% of women in custody in Scotland have addiction problems, whether alcohol or drugs. It's further estimated that 80% of women in prison have brain damage due to head injuries caused by domestic violence, and a similar number of women suffer mental illness to some degree. Presiding Officer, the issue of whether these women should be in prison at all is for another debate, but it's one I'm certain we should have soon. I submit that prison is entirely the wrong place for women whose addiction and chaotic life experience has led them down the wrong path. I'm grateful to SHAP's report for the research which shows that Of the 12,000 people who had community payback orders imposed in 2021 to 22, only 1% received alcohol treatment as part of their order. I know there can be complex reasons for that, but on the face of it, we must do better. 40% of prisoners reported they were drunk at the time of their offence, and almost one-fifth was worried alcohol misuse would be a problem for them upon release. However, 41% said if offered help for their alcohol use, both inside and outside of prison, they would take it. In addition, people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, an entirely preventable condition, are also overrepresented in the justice system. Turning Point Scotland, an excellent third sector organisation, delivers a range of harm reduction approaches in relation to problematic alcohol use across our services. They believe their programme of harm reduction should be incorporated into the justice system to identify and act on a risk of alcohol-related harm in their setting. So time doesn't allow me to detail their initiatives, but it's well worth having a look at their excellent website. Presiding Officer, people coming into the justice system provides an opportunity to some extent to recognise and crucially to address alcohol use disorders, offering both treatment and support. Alcohol brief interventions, mentioned by Elena Whittam, are a good example of this approach that could be strengthened through more consistent delivery and by improving options for diversion to appropriate services. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, it's abundantly clear that alcohol misuse disorders within the justice system is a significant problem that has been overlooked for too long. Our prisons are overcrowded and hard-working prison staff are dealing with a multitude of problems. A targeted programme of support and treatment for alcohol abuse, which of course includes prevention in wider society where Scotland's drinking culture has been a long-standing problem, should be available to reduce the pressure on our justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mackay, and apologies, I was a bit ahead myself. In fact, I will now call Alexandra Stewart to be followed by Carol Mockin. Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to be able to contribute to this afternoon's debate, and I would like to thank Elena Whittam for bringing it to the Chamber this afternoon. The issue of alcohol use disorders is one of the issues that interacts with the Scottish system when it comes to justice. And as it's laid out in the motion today, the statistics on this issue include that nearly two-thirds of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder. The issue, however, is one that goes far beyond the mere numbers. Far too much of the current legislative and the problem that are focused with alcohol within our prisons. In reality, alcohol use disorders affect individuals at all stages of the justice system. That includes initial police contact with custody centres, court settings, liaison in divisions and through care. However, when it comes to the prison setting, it is clear that the current approach to alcohol and drugs seems to be having issues. At HMP Glenocle, in my own region of Clackmannanshire, recently there were 35 inmates who were found under the influence of drugs during Christmas Day. And prison staff reportedly have seized issues that cause that problem. The indication that we have that there is an issue is far, far overreaching. So it is only fair that drugs and alcohol can be looked at when we're dealing with prison situations. It is far less than the Scottish Prison Service were forced to introduce a policy that when it deals with influences when it comes to individuals. These are just two examples of the disruption that can be caused within prison, within the wider system. The Scottish Prison Healthcare Network previously published guidance when it was talking about the misuse within prisons and within custody settings. Unfortunately, that guidance is no longer in use, and our prisons are often the worst of the result of that. Presiding Officer, members across this chamber will agree that the further action is needed to tackle this whole attitude when it comes to alcohol and the wider justice system. Today's motion mentions the solutions that are being looked at and created in supporting individuals who require treatment within the justice system. It is disappointing that approaches that are not being looked at, and there is more guidance that may well need to be ascertained from the Cabinet Secretary, and I look forward to hearing from her in summing up. The Scottish Government is certainly looking at and tackling the National Service specific when it comes to alcohol and drugs within treatment centres, and that's vitally important. There could therefore be an opportunity to ensure that the effective standards that are in place within the justice system as a whole. I hope that in summing up, as I say, the Cabinet Secretary will be able to give us an update on the Scottish Government's progress within this process. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, this is a complex issue that requires bold situations. We've heard today about the individuals, and especially men, when it comes to offending, and they're drunk during their offending, and the amount of women who have to suffer from domestic abuse and violence, and that is also alcohol related, and the individuals who are within our custody and within our systems who are suffering. And I think that has a real impact as to what we should be doing today. So in tackling this issue, I hope the Scottish Government is able to follow the advice and evidence that's been taken from other areas about how this is managed, because the justice system needs to be equipped to hard-working and support the hard-working staff with the tools that need them to do the job effectively, to support themselves and to support those who go through the system. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I now call Cara Mochan to be followed by Emma Roddick. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Elena Whitham for securing this important debate and congratulate her on her speech, which I think sets out the direction we should all support here in Scotland. So I'm very supportive of the motion and welcome Sharp into the gallery. Excessive drinking of alcohol poses a significant public health challenge globally. However, the Scottish culture of high alcohol consumption and binge drinking has created what can only be described as a crisis. And we need to be honest about this if we hope to reverse the current trajectory and help people, families and communities. It is our responsibility here in this place to do things that we can to support those communities. ONS figures released only yesterday revealed that alcohol-specific deaths in Scotland have reached a 15-year high, and that our country continues to have the highest rate of alcohol deaths in the UK. And inequality, as we've heard from Elena, is embedded in Scotland, and so some of these problems with alcohol feel almost built into the life that people are going to have, and we have to be honest about that and seek to change that direction. Whilst rates remain steady compared to 2022, Scotland still has some of the highest rates of alcohol-related harm in Europe. Not only does harmful drinking impact people's physical and mental health, but as we've heard, it also has a profound antisocial impact and can be detrimental to both individual and societal well-being. So it affects us all, so it is all of our responsibility to do something. As we have heard, and why we're here today, there is a strong link between alcohol and criminal behaviour, and the Alcohol Injustice Report we are discussing here today expertly highlights this, providing crucial insight into the extent to which alcohol can fuel violence and criminality and how we can respond to that. The number of people with alcohol use disorders is disproportionately high within the Scottish justice system compared to the rest of the population. We have heard that. A reported 63% of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder, with almost half of those possibly dependent on alcohol. It also highlights findings from the 2019 Scottish Prisoner Survey, which found that 40% of prisoners surveyed reported being drunk at the time of the offence. The link between harmful drinking and criminal behaviour is clear. And this is where I want to emphasise we must work together to not only provide better support for those suffering from alcohol problems, but also work to tackle the root causes of alcohol dependency and alcohol use disorders. It's important that we have that public health approach. By offering people treatment and support to those who come into contact with the criminal justice system, we can do some of that work. We can provide individuals with the opportunity to recognise and address alcohol use disorder. And I've heard a little about the Glasgow Alcohol Court, and I hope to visit at some point. And I hope that some of the positive approaches that we have heard from this, the Cabinet Secretary will agree is very useful. Intervening in this way would not only improve the health and lives of the individuals affected, but has the potential to reduce reoffending rates, thus helping to alleviate the immense pressures that we feel right across Scotland and in the justice system. Economic and social disparities are also prevalent factors when it comes to an individual's choice surrounding alcohol, as I and others have mentioned. And we know that the risk of alcohol-related harm is greater for those most disadvantaged in our society. And I think it's an important point to make that often those are the people that are very hard to support. They don't readily come forward to services, and we have a responsibility to go to them and see what we can provide. And I welcome the steps that the Government have taken to address alcohol harm, such as the minimum unit pricing. But I wonder whether the Cabinet Secretary for Justice today would agree that this is some cross-portfolio working that we need to do, and that I have asked the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health for an update on the delivery of alcohol market reform. And I think if we work together on these issues, we may be able to see beneficial outcomes. I'm aware of time. I'm going to close there and just really thank members for the debate, and particularly Eleanor Witham for securing the important debate today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mocking. And I call Emma Roddick. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too want to thank Elena Whittam for raising this report in the Parliament. And I know how important this issue is to her and how much work she's done to tackle harmful alcohol and drug use. And I do think the Parliament's going to be poorer for losing her insightful and empathetic contributions. The statistics in the report speak for themselves. Almost 2/3 of people in prison having an alcohol disorder, and the best part of a third possibly being dependent. But so many of them are willing to take help. And that is the important part, because as we've just heard from Carol Mockin, that is not always the case. So that is a huge opportunity that has been presented to us to support these people. Now, there's undoubtedly an issue with stigma that will drive not only addiction, but the severity of addiction for those who are in prison or reintegrating into society afterwards. And I would point out that some of the rhetoric that we just heard during FMQs is very unlikely to help this issue. Trying to make prison as punitive as possible is not going to reduce prison numbers or crime. It is not going to make the lives of victims, families or anyone any better. As Elena put it, this is not soft justice, this is smart justice. It serves absolutely nobody to keep people stuck in a cycle of addiction and crime when we know what's causing it. And I think we have a lot to learn yet on addictions and the societal impact both ways, how the negative impacts of how people with addictions are treated are felt not just by that person but by all of us. Failing to support people costs us money, it costs us time, and it costs us fellow members of society who could be more functioning, happier and active contributors to our communities, rather than just likely to return to prison again once they're released. I was struck by comments from prison officers on my recent visit to HMP Inverness. They said that they really get to know a lot of their prisoners. They get to build trust and they understand and see the cycle that so many people are caught in. And they see how poor treatment and judgment that those they've supported inside often then go on to receive outside, even from those who should be offering them support, makes them far more likely to return to the behaviours and the people that led them to their convictions in the first place. So unable to get that support that they really need, they instead return to the harmful support networks that they're used to, and return to alcohol and drugs, and return to committing more crime. We heard from Elena Whittam that your experiences, your disadvantage and your trauma often seem to write your future for you. And it's really clear from this report that people are suffering something that they don't have control or influence over. But we have that opportunity when people are in the justice system to recognise that high likelihood of them developing the illness and give them prevention and treatment inside. There is no excuse for somebody who's dependent on alcohol in the justice system not having that dependency addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Roddick. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I start by paying tribute to Elena Whittam for securing this very important debate this afternoon. And Ms Whittam always brings to every debate that she participates or leads in her insight, her experience and her eloquence in advocating for the causes that she champions. And she's quite correct to talk about the pervasiveness of inequality within our justice system and the people that we seek to serve and rehabilitate for the interests, for the safety of our communities. But we also have to remember that while we must have a real focus on every stage, every step and stage of the justice system about what we can do differently to divert people, to support people, to turn their lives around, we also have to be focused on what happens upstream in health and education and other public services, because as Carol Mawkin says, this has to be cross-portfolio. I am, of course, very grateful to all members who have participated in the debate today. It's been very measured, it's been very thoughtful. I do hope we can take the spirit of this debate forward as we continue to wrestle with our high prison population, for example. And Emma Roddick spoke very powerfully about how we need to have a different debate, a mature debate, a debate that focuses ultimately on what will work to help people turn their lives around and make our communities safer. And Rona Mackay, brought forward that fundamental question on our use of custody, where we have a lot of questions to ask, but ultimately answer as a nature. And Alexander Stewart spoke about the importance of standards and the consistency of those standards being applicable across the system. I'm also, I have to say, very grateful to the Scottish Health Action on Alcohol Problems, SHAP, for what I consider to be a very well thought out position paper. And I would too like to welcome SHAP to Chamber, and also to say that I would be happy to meet with Ms Whittam along with SHAP, and also with Ms Minto if that was of any assistance. I think it is worth repeating the core statistics that Ms Whittam and others have narrated from this very important report, such as that 2/3 of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder. That certainly gives me, as Cabinet Secretary for Justice, a mandate for action. Indeed, when we read at the Scottish Prisoners Survey, as others have outlined, that 41% of prisoners surveyed said they would accept help for their alcohol disorder, yet only 22% say that they have been offered this help. It is clear that action is required right across portfolios. And the inequality for the prisoner population, with men 3 times more likely to die as a result of their use of alcohol, but 9 times more likely if you're a woman, speaks to the strength of the action that we have taken around the Women in Custody strategy, with the establishment of the community custody units, the one in Glasgow and the one in Dundee, and also that additional investment in health that has been made to support the opening of HMP Stirling. Of course, Mr Stewart.
Alexander Stewart.
We've already talked about, and Carol mentioned in her a submission about the number of deaths that we've seen being at a 15-year high, Cabinet Secretary. And it's quite clear that we still have, even so having the minimum pricing that was brought in 7 years ago, we still have an emergency and individuals are slipping through the net. So what do we need to do when we're looking at treatment and rehabilitation for individuals? Because our individuals already said within the report that in custody they would accept some support, but that doesn't seem to be there.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I will come on to speak in a little bit more detail about the action within the justice system on this very matter. But the point that Mr Stewart and indeed others have made, that there is no silver bullet. I'm a great advocate for minimum unit pricing and would never detract from it. But there's never one solution. There are always many solutions, and particularly the work that colleagues are taking in and around pursuing that public health approach. And I know that Ms Minto and other health ministers are waiting on some further work that has been done in and around what we can do within our devolved competence around the advertisement of alcohol. It's not an easy solution, that particular issue. But what I want to really convey to Mr Stewart and others is that irrespective of an individual's abode, whether it's in the community or indeed at His Majesty's pleasure, they have the same rights to access to treatment. Our National Health Service does not and should not discriminate against people on the basis of their past life, of what they've done or what they've not done, or indeed where they are housed, whether they are at liberty or whether they are in custody. And that is something that I have had to my very core since I was a prison social worker quite a few decades ago now. But in terms of the action underway, Presiding Officer, can I just touch on some things? I was very proud that one of the last actions that I took when I left drugs policy to become Cabinet Secretary for Justice is that we did update the prison to rehab pathway. There was some important learning undertaken in that work about how we prepare people leaving custody to go into rehabilitation, and we also removed the 12-week limit on a period of rehabilitation. And although the focus on residential rehab, or the renewed focus on residential rehab, came as a result of our drugs deaths crisis, the investment in residential rehab actually benefits more people with an alcohol disorder. And I was very pleased to do that. One of the things that has really changed within our prison system in terms of culture, and it's a real operational change, is the presence of the recovery movement in our prisons. And the work that the Scottish Recovery Consortium has really grown. It started in 2021 in HMP Perth, where I used to work a number of years ago, and they started working with 10 residents in HMP Perth, and that grew to HMPs Edinburgh, Addiewell, Glenorchy, Polmont, and what was then Corton Vale. And now, you know, there is a recovery presence in all prisons, with also the options of mutual aid groups being able to be accessed. And that speaks to the creation and the building of relationships that serves people well in custody, but also prepares them for liberation. But it's important that all of this work, you know, aligns with MAT standards, because yes, access to treatment, access to medicine, to interventions is crucial, but so is that broader holistic support also, whether it's finance, welfare, or psychological. Speaking to the consistency and the cross-government angle to this, one of the pieces of work that I chair, and it's cross-government, there's a ministerial oversight group on prisoner healthcare. And that has been looking at things like the Scottish Prison Service alcohol and drugs strategy. It's been looking at the recruitment and retention of band 5 and 6 nurses within the prison system. It's been looking at things like a target operating model for prisoner healthcare, which might sound quite technical and you know, perhaps not the most exciting aspect of policy. But I have to say, if we've really got to get into the nuts and bolts, if you want to see standards, access and consistency. And I would like to pay tribute to the National Prison Care Network as well. I'll just touch very briefly, Presiding Officer, because I'm extremely conscious of time, that the arrest referral work is also expanding. That's about those contactable moments. Groups have been established across most local authority areas now. And also in terms of alcohol and drug courts, I am very supportive of problem-solving courts and how they are tailored to change individual behaviour and monitoring someone's behaviour. There's really strong evidence that supports them. Ultimately, this is the decision of the judiciary and the Scottish courts and tribunal system if they create, you know, specialist divisions within the system. But I will certainly discuss this matter further with the new Chief Executive of the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service and also the new Lord President. And of course, the core of the Sharp report was about that standard approach. Others have spoke of the importance of the national treatment specification for alcohol and drug treatment in Scotland and how that needs to connect to MAT standards. And we will use the national service specification to promote the good practice that already exists in some areas of Scotland and ensure that that work is incorporated into standard practice. And the final point that I will absolutely finish on, and it is my final point, Presiding Officer, I do promise, and it is one of accountability. It's something that I speak about often in this chamber because we are accountable to ourselves and to each other as parliamentarian, and services are also accountable to themselves and to other services also. And accountability is not about blame, but accountability is about answers, and it's about actions, and it's about people working together, and it's about proactively seeking to make a difference to prevent crises becoming catastrophe, and always seeking to proactively take that preventative approach as well as respond to when life goes terribly wrong. And that's what I, and I'm sure everybody in this chamber who's participated in this debate today, wants to seek, is to seek that different debate that has different outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate. I suspend this meeting until 2:30 p.m.